Time for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please come down to a microphone in the aisle and let us know who you are and where you're from. And if we could just turn the house lights up a little bit so that we can see people more easily, that would be fantastic. I might just start off quickly while we're getting our first question to a microphone and ask you, Richard. Emma sort of put it really beautifully when she said, she'd spoken to one of her farmer mates and he said, tell them they're dreaming. So, how do you make the goal real to people and in the process fire the imagination that you were talking about that's necessary to really achieve this kind of change?
So I'll come back to, I made the point that $100 billion is meaningless to most people, and it's meaningless to a lot of farmers too. So how do you make the goal achievable? And it was what I was trying to say. I think we need to look at what's in the plan underpinning that target and what the burning platform is. I think you make it very real when you start talking about, particularly if you're in an exporting sector or something like that, all the competitive countries that are taking our markets and their ability to keep that market share and what our future prospects are, that becomes very real. And the only way that we avoid that happening is to remain competitive and to boost our productivity. And all of that is in this plan. But all of it does take, and just a couple of things that Emma was talking about, she's absolutely spot on that farmers are going to be the one at the end of the day that are actually doing the things to meet the challenges. But farmers don't exist in isolation. And I guess that's the other point that I was trying to make, that, that farmers exist in regional communities and support systems and supply chains, and all of that has to grow and support and change agriculture as well if we're going to really achieve these truly transformational targets. I said the wrong word there.
Transformational.
Yes, transformational. We're not transpiring, we're transforming.
Thank you, Richard. Question over here, please.
Hi, it's Brendan McAuliffe. I'm from the Office of Northern Australia, and I'd just be keen to hear from any of the members of the panel how they see the opportunities in Northern Australia contributing to reaching this target. There's been a lot of talk for many years on how we capitalise on the inputs available across Northern Australia, but the development is yet to be seen.
Yes, there was a focus on that here a few years ago, in actual fact. Who wants to pick up the question?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I've had actually amazing question as well. I was just saying how I've spent a lot of time in Queensland. I've been working with Townsville Enterprise and working up in that area in the Burdekin and Hinchinbrook. I think Liam described it really well. You drive around up there and you just see opportunity. There's so much country up there that you could do stacks with, Liam, and so much. There's good access to water in some of it. There's more opportunities in water, as I said during my talk. There's lots of tropical horticulture where there's strong demand in things like nuts and tropical fruits. The meat sectors, I think, are going to go really well up there. It's starting to transition into more higher value. Protein-based things like soya and those sort of crops. So I've really enjoyed working up in the tropics, and I think a focus on investment, putting capital up in there is just really exciting.
What do you think, Liam? Are you eyeing the north at all?
I get cold shivers when I go to the north, to be honest. So in 2010, we did a lot of work looking around investing up in the Gulf. And there was, of course, which has since happened, the announcement around release of water off the Flinders River and the development of irrigation industries. So we spent a fair bit of time looking. I guess the seminal moment for me was standing on a property, Nonda Downs, which was for sale at the time. And we'd done the feasibility and all the back of the envelope stuff as well. It was a cattle property with potential. At that stage, the property sold for $130 an acre under the hammer. The Flinders River is either a dry, sandy creek bed or it's this raging torrent that we've seen in the past month. There was no tractor dealership in town. There was no horticultural services or agronomists. There was no pack sheds, there was no ginning services, there was no population to provide labour for whatever we'd want to do. The railway was dominated by mining exports and not agricultural exports. At that same time, I could go and stand alongside the Murrumbidgee at Hay and for $120 an acre buy grazing country that could be converted. I was standing next to a river that had 2 million megalitres of regulated water, and there was a town and there was horticultural services, agronomy services, machinery deal. I think you know where I'm going. There was schools and there was childcare centres and other things. And so pound for pound, it just made no sense to be putting any money in the north relative to the opportunities that were in the south. And I think one of the key elements there is the embedded value captured in land and water price that comes with existing regional infrastructure. And we've been to Western Australia and looked, we've been to Tasmania and looked, but we've got 200 years of investment in communities and rail and road and water regulation, etc., and population that is levered down onto the underlying resource. And so you've got to do your numbers carefully if you're going to a greenfield site on a relatively small basis in an isolated place, because it's that infrastructure cost that'll kill you.
Sobering points. We'll take a question in the middle.
Thank you. Amanda Cam is my name. I'm from Mackay, the Deputy Mayor there, but also sit on a number of advisory boards and a former primary producer. So Emma, thank you for your contribution. I valued that as a former farmer. My question is, we've talked about a number of transformational changes required, and it's really about transformational leadership at a political level. It's one thing to talk about bipartisanship, but the difference and challenges associated across every state and then every industry, from local government to state government to federal government. I'd just like to ask the panel their view in particular around what sort of transformational leadership you think is required, and in particular in the context of investing in supply chains, infrastructure across regional Australia, because the harsh reality is we would love to have our primary producers connect to the Internet of Things, but we still can't get black spot funding in multiple areas, as well as road infrastructure and port infrastructure that provides those access to markets.
What do you think, Emma? We'll start with you.
You mentioned that I didn't look at my notes, and the problem with not looking at your notes is that you miss things like saying we need transformational leadership, so thank you for that question. To give Nuffield a bit of a plug, we would talk about leadership at Nuffield, and when scholars are selected, there's the notion that everybody's going to become a leader, but they're going to become a leader in different places, and that there's some people who become leaders in their community and some people who become leaders at a state level or at a federal level or from a commercial point of view. So we probably don't have enough focus on leadership in general in this country, because we've got this whole tall poppy syndrome going on, and people struggle to stand up and say what needs to be said. So I get complimented that I say things like it is, and I know that everybody else knows exactly what I know. So we need to start ensuring that, particularly at the political level, at that government level, that they're speaking the truth to us, and that we call them out when they're not, and that we call out those leaders when they're wasting our time, essentially. Like, we end up in a big debate for the last week about whether or not it was Coles or Woolworths who put the price of milk up 10 cents. And whilst it's a great move in a direction to acknowledge the real price of food for farmers, the argument or the debate then becomes about what Joel Fitzgibbon has to say to David Littleproud and who's on, and this big debate ensues, and the actual issue gets missed, and the leaders in those communities are not the ones that are the voice at the table. So it's a great question, how do we have transformational leadership? But I actually just think that we need to start saying things exactly like they are, and not, how to get over just thinking about the problem and just talking about those solutions. And as soon as there's anything that distracts from those solutions, that we call it out, and we have the courage to do that as an industry, rather than this balance between the carrot and the stick. And I think sometimes we're using the carrot and not often enough using the stick. Relationships are important, but exactly what you're saying, we need leadership, but we need it at all of those levels, and we should be encouraging that in young people that have, through primary school and high school, that it's okay to be a leader and that we're building those leadership skills. And I made the comment about bushfires on the weekend, and I was thinking to myself, why is it that you spend 13 years at school learning just about nothing? Every person in this country should be able to go out and fight a fire if necessary. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's just a practical solution. And then you think about a country like Israel, where every single young person has gone through the military and are ready to fight on behalf of the nation if necessary. So it's about having those targets and just sticking to them.
Richard, do you want to have a crack?
So the visionary leadership that we need, so that we can actually get the sorts of supply chain investment that you're talking about. So the Northern Australia example, it doesn't actually, you can put mangoes on a boat in Darwin and get them to Singapore cheaper than you can, put them on a truck and get them to Sydney and then put them on a boat and get them there. That will take national visionary, both sides of politics leadership to decide that agriculture is an industry that is going to be important for Australia. And for that to happen, the public needs to support that, and they need to vote for that. And I know, to be honest, I'll be very honest about this, I was uneasy about using a lot of the language that I was using in my talk, which was fairly motherhoody and fairly sort of, we've got to talk about this really big language and we've got to be inspirational, bring people along. But I think we do. I think that we absolutely do need to get the public believing that agriculture is important for the future of Australia, to enable the political will or demand the political will to do that sort of visionary leadership to make those big infrastructure investments for the whole of the country. Now, I completely agree with Emma in what she's saying about needing to be more forthright and standing up and telling it like it is. We tend to do that for the issues of today, though, to fix the things of today that need to be fixed today. And we need to also be doing that for the stuff that's coming 2030, for this one, the 2030 vision as well.
When you compare what it was like to be in the sector 10 years ago, there's very little news about it. And you'd pick up the newspaper and once a week maybe you got a story about food and ag and the sort of excitement around it, whereas now it's every day there's multiple stories about the food sector. I think we're going quite well there. I like your point that if that's where the 100 billion targets is very useful, because you just get buy-in about almost like an excitement around the sector, and that hopefully will flow through into places like Mackay, where you can convince governments to say, back us. We're going to double our economic output.
Yes, people have never been more interested in where their food comes from, so that needs to be capitalised on. Question over here.
Thank you, Lee. First of all, I'd just like to comment on the quality of the panel discussion. Fantastic breadth of discussion. I'm actually from the aviation industry and I'm actually here to help. So my name is Paul Fox. I'm the founder of a company called Agronomics Australia. We're setting up an international air freight network exclusively for agricultural freight. I just wanted to sort of reference the roadmap. In the global markets section, it talks about agricultural exports are forecast to total $47 billion, which is almost half of the target. It also says for 2018-19, accounting for 70% of agricultural production value. So given that significant value already and also going forward, my question is, what has the industry done to look at the massive increase in demand for that international and even domestic logistics sort of chain for the sector? My observations from the research I've done over the last 3 or 4 years is that the existing network's not working. I identified this opportunity through international trade mission work. So I'm just very interested to know what has been done in the planning for that and if we can help.
Any person on the panel in particular?
Look, I think it's open to everybody. I think everyone's sort of touched on this.
Robert?
Hey, I love talking about air freight. So I've just written the Western Sydney Airport freight vision and paper. So that's out, that's on the internet, it's a public document now. So feel free to jump on and see it if you haven't already seen it. I went to Perth about 2 years ago, actually just when I started at KPMG, and was looking at the lobster export Lee, and it was very ad hoc in terms of the groups doing it out of there. We're just relying on a single passenger flight into China every day. If that plane was late or delayed, there was real issues for them. Yep. So it's a really exciting sector. It's relatively small volume, but the product by definition is all fairly high value. So yeah, it's kind of developed as almost like a serendipitous ad hoc sector. So what we're saying is to start to get a bit more planned about that. So, you know, actually build food freight into your design of airports, into expansion plans of airports. Have a look at what work we did at Auckland Airport, and so just start to really carefully plan how food integrates into airports, because air traffic is massively increasing. Another trend that we just can't get our head around. Only 7% of Chinese people have passports at the moment. 50% of US people have passports. There's already more domestic travel in China than there is in the US. If you start to have 50% of Chinese people have passports, the amount of air travel in the world is just going to go massively up. So the opportunity to put freight under every single aeroplane is just going to be an incredible opportunity. 1 million Chinese tourists last year in Australia. That's forecast to be 3 million by the time we get to 2030. Imagine 3 million Chinese tourists coming to Australia every day. So the amount of planes coming, the amount of traffic, it's mind-blowing.
Richard?
This is another genuine burning platform, because the Belt and Road Initiative coming out of China, trillions of dollars being spent on transport infrastructure around the world, financing the development of ports and airports and roads in other countries to get goods into China. Australia is not part of that initiative officially, and we will very rapidly fall behind if we don't try and keep pace with it. So yeah, look, it's a critical one to get right, and a critical area for very urgent and immediate investment.
Any other final comments? Nope. Good. Look, I know there are more questions. I'm sorry, we're running over time. This has been a powerhouse start today too, I think. We've had fantastic presentations this morning from these guys. Senator Colbeck had some very interesting things to say as well, so we are off to a flyer on day 2. Robert Poole, Richard Heath, Emma Germano and Liam Lenigan, thank you so much. Could you please thank them?